If you've ever heard of people cutting their knitting or steeking their knitting and the thought of that just terrifies you, this video is for you. We're going to walk through a full tutorial on how to knit a small cowl and cut it open and finish it off so you can learn how to cut your knitting without having everything unravel. Hey Nerdy Knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and the goal here at Nerdy Knitting is to help you knit garments and other small accessories that fit you well. Now, I wanted to introduce this because I love to do color work knitting, and a lot of people are really scared about when it comes to color work, like especially like a full cardigan or something where you have to cut that garment open. That can be kind of a scary thing. You certainly don't want everything to unravel. But there are some basic steps you have to follow to secure your stitches, and then you can safely cut. And I walk through that process with this full tutorial. So knit this cowl along with me. Couple of evenings of work. The hardest part probably is actually just finishing off the button band, and that's not that hard. But I'm going to walk you through each step of the process, from knitting this and creating your STEEK right here that you're later going to come back and secure and then cut open and then add that button band. So if you've been wanting to learn how to cut your knitting so you could do like some beautiful Fair Isle sweater in the future, or a cardigan where you know you're going to want to cut that open, practice on something small first, like this cowl. So you'll find the link for this pattern down below the video, along with like a list of supplies that you'll need, and we're going to go right to the overhead and go over the whole process from supplies to casting on and everything in between. There's also a second video where I talk about the different ways to secure your stitches, because there's more than one way to do that. In this tutorial, I'm going to use the needle felted method, but I have another video, I'll link it down below, that walks through like the crochet edge and the machine sewing and the hand sewn edge, where you just want to secure those stitches so nothing is going to unravel. So this video will kind of show you how the needle felting works, but for a full process of how to secure your stitches, you're going to want to check out that video as well. But you'll find the pattern link down below. Let's get right to it. Let's talk supplies before we get started. So here is our cowl right here. The yarn I'm using is Knit Picks Palette. This is a fingering weight 2-ply yarn, lots of great colors. So Craft Yarn Council Superfine #1 is what we're looking for here. And in this sample, the colors are rouge and white. And the sample that I'm going to do for the tutorial is going to use Blue Bayou and Nimbus. So look for something that has good high contrast. We want to see lots of difference between the two colors so we can really get this pattern to pop. You're also going to need your knitting needles. So these are US 4, 3.5 millimeters, a 16-inch circular, or 40 centimeter. So you just need circular needles, US 4. Going to need a couple of stitch markers as well. You'll want a tapestry needle and some scissors when we cut our STEEK and weave in all our ends. We're also going to need some buttons. So you'll need 5 buttons. So these are 1/2 inch or 13 to 14 millimeter buttons. This is what you're going to want. So 1/2 inch size or so will fit really well for this cowl. So this is all of your supplies, and of course you'll find the pattern linked down below. So all we need right now are our needles and our color 1. We want our darker color. We're going to start with our hem down here, so I can just put everything aside right now. We're going to work on this folded hem, and we're going to knit this part flat. So you're going to cast on the stitches that you need for the hem. We're going to work this side of the hem, then we're going to have our turning row. In this sample I did a picot edge. In this one I'm just going to do a purl row, just to have like I'll show you the difference between the two, but you can have your choice of what kind of hem you want. Then we'll finish with our darker color here. Then we're going to cast on to join in the round, add our STEEK stitches there, and we can start doing our color work. But to get started, we just need our color 1 at the moment, what we want for that bottom hem. So you're going to grab color 1 and your needles, and you're going to cast on. The stitch count is in the pattern. I'm just going to use long tail cast on, but you can use any cast on that you like. Doesn't really matter because it's going to be folded down and stitched to the inside. So just get started with that first of all. So I'm all cast on. We're not going to join to work in the round though. We're going to knit flat. So we're just going to work in stockinette stitch. So our first row, make sure I don't have the tail and I've got my working yarn. So our first row, we're just going to knit. So I've knit 1 row. Now I'm going to turn. I'm going to purl a row. And we're going to do this a couple more times. Just follow the pattern. We need to have 6 rows of stockinette stitch. So there's my row number 2 that I'm working on right now. So just work in stockinette for 6 rows, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do an increase round. So I've done my 6 rows of stockinette. Now we have to do an increase row. So in my original sample, it has like a little kind of a tendency sometimes to flip just a little bit. So on this sample, I decided I'm going to start with fewer stitches, and then we'll work an increase row before we do our turning row, and that should help it hold its place. So in the pattern, that's what we have now. My sample, this first one, does kind of wants to flip right along that edge. So I've adjusted the pattern for this sample. So we've done our 6 rows, so we're going to increase a bunch of stitches. So we're going to knit 5 and then make 1 left. So we're going to go underneath that bar that you can see. When you pull it apart, you can see there's a bar between your stitches on each needle. Put our left needle underneath, and it's leaning off to the left, and we're going to knit through the back loop, and that's going to twist it closed. Sometimes it's hard to get back in there, so I come from the front and I kind of slide it around to get a little more space. So there's our first increase. Now we're going to knit 9 and keep doing that again. So there's 9, so I'm going to increase again, another make 1 left, and then continue. So knit 9, make 1 left until we're down to the last few stitches. Okay, coming up on the end, there's my last make 1 left, and then I have 4 stitches left, so I'm going to knit those 4. So then go and check your stitch count, make sure you have the right stitch count, and we are going to purl 1 row. And then we're going to work our turning hem row. So now I finished my increase round, I've purled around, now it's time to do our turning hem. So in this sample, I did a little picot edge, and that is what is in the pattern. So to do that, you are going to just knit 2 together, yarn over all the way to the end of the row. So knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, and you're going to do that all the way to the end to the last 2 stitches, and you'll finish with a knit 2 together. So you'll reduce your stitch count by just 1 stitch. But if you don't want a picot hem and you just kind of want a plain folded hem, what we want to do instead is work a purl row. So instead we'll just have it'll have just like a little purl ridge right at the top when you fold it over, and that'll be it. So that I'll demonstrate that. That's what I'm going to put on this cowl, but this sample here uses that picot edge. So you get this little scalloped edge all along. All of the edges have that same little scalloped edge. So the picot instructions are in the pattern, but I do have in the notes, if you'd rather have a plain folded hem, then that's what we're going to do instead. So this is an alternative to the picot instead. So we're going to start with a purl 2 together. We just need to get rid of 1 stitch basically, just so our stitch count is correct for the next section. So purl 2 together, and then we are going to just purl to the end, and that is it. So you have your choice. You can work the picot edge or this purl ridge that will make our turning row for our folded hem. So I'm going to do that, and then I need to work in stockinette stitch some more. So this is the inside. There's our turning row. So now we have to work 8 more rows in stockinette stitch after that. That's what we've done here. So there is the first part, there's our turning row, and then we work 8 more rows of stockinette. So I'm going to do that now. You don't need to watch me work in stockinette stitch. So you're going to work your turning row, work 8 more rows. You're going to finish by working a right side row. So you'll finish that right side row, then you're going to stop, and we're going to come back here, cast on our STEEK, and start knitting in the round. Okay, so I finished knitting a row. I'm not going to turn at this point. I'm going to join in the round right here. But what we're doing is going to add a STEEK section in this part of our cowl. So we're going to need a couple of markers, and if you want, you can place markers between like all of the repeats of the color work. If you like to do that, that's another option, but we're not going to turn our work. We're going to put a marker on our needle, our right needle, and then we're going to cast on 7 STEEK stitches. You just use the backwards loop, or if you want to use the knit cast on, you can use that. So I'm going to cast on 7. There's 1, 2. So if you don't know how to do this cast on, it's very simple. Just thumb down, scoop towards yourself. It makes a loop on your thumb, just like that. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that's our STEEK. We're going to put the other marker in, so we're just putting markers to separate our STEEK, and then we can start knitting in the round. So we're going to join in our second color And you look at the chart, it's an 8-stitch repeat. That's what we're going to focus on for all of the pattern all the way to the end of the last stitch. And then we have one more stitch outside of that repeat. I did that so that both edges would match each other across this little divide right here. I wanted the sides to be exactly the same. So there's one extra stitch because we're not truly working, we're working in the round, but in the end we're going to be cutting this open and we want both sides to match. So I've cast on my 7 STEEK stitches. I put my marker on there. So we're going to grab this yarn and we are going to start working in the round. So just make sure everything is nice and neat and nothing is twisted. We certainly don't want to twist our work at this point. I'm going to grab that yarn, and our first stitch is with this background color. So our light color is our background. So I'm just going to knit that first stitch with it. It's not joined yet since it's a brand new color. So I'm going to hold that tightly. And then get my blue yarn, which will join it together. And we're going to knit 1 stitch with the blue. Oops, and I dropped some stitches. Let me pick those back up. So this stitch is going to join in the round right there. So I'm going to snug it up pretty tightly and get my background color. Now I want this dark color to really pop and stand out, so I'm going to hold it as my pattern color. I'm going to hold it in my left hand. I will show you the other ways you can do this if you don't hold a yarn in each hand, but you want to hold it beneath or to the left of your background. We really want this color to pop in our pattern. So now we have to knit 5 with the white or your lighter color. And then 1 with the blue, and that brings us to the end of our 8-stitch repeat. So light color, dark color, 5 lights, and a dark. There's our 8 stitches. Now we're going to repeat that again. If you want to, you can put a marker there. If you like to have a marker every time you do a repeat, put markers if you want. So my dark color is on the left side and it's below this light color as I'm stranding. Like you can see, the blue is underneath. That's what I want. I want to keep that underneath. It just makes it stand out a little bit more because it's a little closer to the work. So that's the end of the second repeat. I could place another marker. I stop and I check and make sure everything looks good. Let's say you like to hold them both in your left hand. I don't generally do this because I find that they get twisted up, but even there you could put 1 on each finger if you wanted to, like that. I find it hard to do, but so my next stitch is white, so I'm going to grab that from above. I want to maintain my color dominance. I want the white above, and then I want the blue underneath, and then white above again. So 5 stitches like this. And after I knit those 5, I try to be very loose. I don't want any tight floats on the back, so I kind of spread it out as I go. Then I can knit with my blue, and that's giving me a nice long float of the blue in the back across those 5 stitches. The pattern repeat is small enough that you'll never have to catch a float. That's the most I think is 5 stitches in between each one. So, and that's less, that's pretty small. So you're not probably going to get your finger stuck in there. So you're absolutely fine to not catch floats. The longest one I think is 5. So, but if you're going to hold them both in this hand, you have to remember to keep, that the light color above and the dark color below. So if you're in your right hand, I can't seem to hold them both at the same time, so I tend to pick up the 1. So right now it's the light color, so my dark color is down here. That's the end of that 5 stitches. So I drop that and I kind of drop it to the front and I pick that dark color up from underneath. I want to keep it underneath. And you can see like that loop is quite long, but as it stretches out, that one is a little on the long side. I could make my stitches, my floats a little bit shorter than that. We don't want to be able to catch our fingers in there, but we do want to keep them long enough so when we stretch our knitting, it's nice and loose and it's not going to pucker up. So I knit that one and that's the end of that repeat. And I drop this one on this side because I want to keep it underneath. And this one's over the top. 1 stitch, drop, underneath, 1 stitch, drop over there. This is above, and then I can knit my 5. So that is how you're going to maintain your color dominance depending on how you knit. You just want to keep your pattern color below or to the left, so it's a little bit closer to the work, and your background color a little above or to the right of your pattern. This makes those stitches spread out a little bit more. So you're going to keep working row 1. I'm going to keep working to the end of the row, and then when I get to, I'll be 1 stitch before the marker and I'll have finished repeating that 8 stitch repeat, and I'll have 1 stitch left outside of the box that I need to repeat. But I do like to stop and check and make sure everything looks right. So I'm on my last repeat, my last 5 with my background color. Oh, and things are a bit tangled up here. Oops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I knit 1 too many. Let's take that one back out. Okay, so, and then I've got 1 blue here, and that's the end of my last repeat. I still have 1 stitch left outside that repeat box after the red line, so that's that stitch right there. Now I can slip my marker, and then we're going to do like a stripe pattern for our STEEK. It makes it very easy to cut. So we're going to knit 1 with our blue or our pattern color, 1 with our background, 1 with our pattern, 2, and the backwards loop makes this a little finicky to get in there, but just keep going. And we'll finish with our pattern color right here. And then that is our first row done, and it can be a little loose here, so we can pull on the yarn tail to make sure everything is joined nicely right there. But we'll tighten it up on this round as well. So there is our STEEK is now all set. We're going to keep the STEEK going, so we're going to have like this vertical stripe. You'll see as you go how it's looking, but alternating between your pattern and your background color to create a stripe, so we can have a nice line to cut down when we're done. So then we go on to the next round in our pattern. I'm not going to demonstrate the whole thing, but we're on round 2 now. So it is this color, and that yarn tail is, that yarn is really loose, so I'll give that a little tug. That'll tighten it up now. And then 1 with this one, 1 with this one, and then 3 with this. And then you'll see like the pattern just kind of stacks up on top of each other, and you can see like it's very geometric in design, so it's easy to tell where you should be or if you've messed up or something like that. So I've got to stop and check. I can't talk and knit at the same time. But now we're all set. So we're going to do round 2, and then you're going to keep going until, so round 2 all the way around, and then round 3, round 4, all the way to round 8. Then you're going to keep repeating that whole motif over and over. And the pattern will tell you how many times you want to repeat those 8 rounds until you've done like the length of the cowl. And then we're going to do the top hem. So I've been doing my knitting. Here's how it looks at this point. I'm almost done. So there is what your STEEK is going to look like. You're going to just knit 1 with a color 1, knit 1 with color 2, repeat that 2 more times, and then finish with color 1. So you're creating this stripe. So when we come back later, we're going to come right down the center, this color 2 stitch in the middle, and that's where we're going to cut. So we're creating this stripe. That's all going to get folded to the inside. You can't even see it on the final sample. That's what we're going to use to pick up stitches along that edge. This will be all folded in, but that's what your STEEK is looking like. So you should continue knitting your chart and working this STEEK. So we're going to work this chart. The pattern will tell you how many times to repeat the chart. Then after you repeat it, you're going to work the final or row one more time. We want to balance the top and the bottom as well. Like we balanced side to side, so these two edges match. We want to make sure our bottom and our top match as well. So I just have to finish knitting this final bit of round one again. So I'll get my yarn back the way it needs to be. The blue is in my left hand and the gray is in my right. Check my pattern, make sure I know where I've left off. I finished a repeat right there, so I'm about to start the next repeat, and I'm just going to work these last few stitches. So last two, I'm right on this part now. I can take this marker off. We have finished with the pattern. The cowl part is all done. Now we're going to go back to knitting flat. So we're going to start by binding off our 7 STEEK stitches. So that's the first one I want to bind off. So I need to knit 2 and bind that off. That's 1, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I need to bind off this last one. I take my marker out. I'm going to knit 1 more stitch, bind that one off. So we bound off our STEEK. We're all finished with that. We're going to go back to knitting flat for our top, the top part of our cowl, the top hem. So we can break color 2. We're done with that. So at this point, I'm going to go back to knitting flat. So I'm going to knit this row. It's a bit tricky right now because we were knitting in the round, so I'm going to kind of like pull my needle out a little bit. There we go. Now I can put this stitch back, and I'm just going to knit to the end of the row. I'm coming up here on the end, my last few stitches, and we're not knitting in the round anymore. So there's my knit row. Of course, that last stitch is loose because we broke the yarn, so I'll tug that. We're going to turn, kind of like pull my needle out, and we're going to work back in the other direction. So we're going to purl the other way, and we're going to repeat this 3 more times. So you're going to work 8 rows total. We want 8 rows of stockinette stitch right here, just like we have down here. We want to have 8 rows of stockinette. So you've knit to the end. Now we're going to work back and forth in rows. We're going to purl back the other way. So you're going to do that till you have 8 rows, and then we're going to do our turning row. I've finished 8 rows now, so the first part of the hem. Now it's time to do that turning row. So you're going to have your 2 options here. If you want the plain folded hem, you're going to purl on a right side row, and that's going to give you that turn right here. Or if you want the picot hem, you're going to do a knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over. You'll follow that all the way to the last stitch, and then your last stitch you're going to knit 1. So if you want the picot, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over. You're going to keep doing that. And that will give you that pretty picot edge right there. I'm doing the plain folded hem, so I need to purl this row. So I'm going to purl this row, and then we have to work a wrong side row. So I'll purl the next row, and then we're going to work our decrease row. All right, so now we're going to work a decrease row. We want our top and our bottom hem to not flip out. So I'm going to decrease the stitches. So this part is just slightly smaller. So this one has like a tiny bit of a tendency to flip. So I'm trying to avoid that with this sample. So we're going to decrease some of our stitches away. So we're going to decrease a little bit here. So we're going to knit 8 and then do a knit 2 together. And you're just going to do that to the last 9 stitches and then knit 9. So we're just getting rid of a few stitches just to make the inside circumference of our hem a little bit smaller. So there's 8, and then knit 2 together, and then knit 8, and knit 2 together. I'm just going to keep doing this to the end, and then I'll have 9 stitches left, and I will just knit those 9. Then I'm going to go back to working 5 more rows of stockinette stitch, just like we have down here. We want a little more stockinette, and then we're going to bind off loosely, and we can fold these to the inside, and we're going to whip stitch them in place. So you're going to do a decrease row, do a little more stockinette stitch, and that'll be the end of like the most of the cowl, and then we just have some finishing left to do. So I've just finished binding off. So at this point you can wash this and then pin it out to dry, pin out the top and the bottom so they're not folded. But I finished my knitting, I'm bound off, I'm ready to just do my folded hem. So I'm just gonna demonstrate it, but if you don't like working with these rolled up edges, then soak it, pin it out so you have a nice straight edge. But then we want to whip stitch our bottom and top hems so they are not gonna move anymore. You can see there's a whip stitched hem right there. So you wanna get your color 1, and we want a length of yarn that's gonna go around this like twice. So I'm just gonna kind of lay it out. There's 1, that's gonna go around once, so I'm gonna double that. That's 2. And then we're gonna thread our needle and we're going to whip stitch this down. So I'll start with my bottom hem here. And if you want to, you could get some locking stitch markers and fold it all in and pin it down, but I don't really find that it's too much of an issue. So I just start by putting my needle through the edge right there. And I want to leave a tail of yarn for later on. So I'll just grab it with these other tails here so it's not going to go anywhere. Then I'm going to fold it down. And I want to follow sort of like just a line of the stockinette right there. Or you could even use the thread, the yarn here, but that's not really a great place to do it. So I try to grab the heads of the stitches right here, these little bumps right there as I go along. So I'm going to just grab this one right here on the edge. And then I kind of do it in 2 steps. I grab the head of that stitch there, and then I just come under my cast on edge at the same time. And pull that through. Make sure I'm leaving a tail of yarn. And then I just repeat the process. I go to the next head of the stitch. That's the next one right there. And then the next cast on stitch. So next head of the stitch here. And then next cast on stitch. We don't want anything peeking through and everything. I want everything to look seamless on the front. So I just check the front, make sure it looks all right. And it does, so we just continue that process. Head of the stitch and the cast on edge. And I'm just going to work my way around until I finish all of this. And there we go, we've whip stitched it in place. Now the inside there's fewer stitches than the outside because we did a decrease, so it's not going to match up exactly, but you just kind of fold it in. You can see it's a little bit shorter compared to the other edge right there, but it's totally fine. Now, I'm going to repeat this process. I can break off this yarn, it's a little too long. And I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom hem. And it does want to flip, but once I give it a good soak, that's going to disappear. So there is our plain folded hem and our picot hem, so you can see the difference. So I'm going to do the same thing for my bottom hem, and then the next thing we want to do is reinforce our STEEK, trim up our ends, and then we're going to do the button band across the front, this part right here. I finished whip stitching the top and the bottom, and this is another point where you could wash and block if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that yet. The next thing we want to do is reinforce our STEEK. We don't want to just cut it yet. Depending on the yarn, I'm using pretty woolly yarn. I probably would be safe to just cut and go, but you want to reinforce those stitches, especially if you've used a plant fiber or superwash yarn. You want to make sure these are nice and secure. I'm going to be using a felting method to secure this, but I have a video all about the different methods for securing your STEEK. So you can check that out and choose the method that you want to use for your yarn. This one's only suitable for wool. It's not going to work on plant fibers or superwash. So you're going to want to do a crochet STEEK or a sewn STEEK. You can find out how to do that in that video. And I'm just going to do the other one that I demonstrate in that video, which is felting the STEEK, which only works if you have a fiber that can be felted like wool. So I'm just going to secure my STEEK, and then we can cut and get moving along to our next section. So if you want to just see, all I'm doing is I'm putting this pad underneath the section I want to felt, getting all my ends out of the way. And then I'm just going to use this needle tip to work right down the middle of these stitches to secure them in place. And it's actually pretty quick. It doesn't take very long at all. It doesn't actually do much on the front side of the fabric, but I'll show you the other side in a minute. And it just makes it nice and all sticky inside. There's a little look. You can see it's already starting to felt. I'm going to run up and down and do a little bit more of this, and then we'll cut the STEEK. So we're going to use that center line right down the middle, our light color right there. That's what we want to cut along right there. That's why I like doing my STEEK in stripes, because it makes it really easy to know exactly where to cut. There we go. It's all cut open. I'm going to also trim my yarn tails, because I'm not even going to weave these in. I'm just going to tuck them right inside the button band. If you want to weave them in, go right ahead. But I've never had an issue with something coming undone, but I'm also using a pretty sticky wool, so that makes a difference as well. If you're using something that's not sticky, then you might want to weave in your ends. So the next thing, now that we're secure, is we want to pick up our button bands, and we've got a right and a left button band. It really doesn't matter which you do on which side, because this is kind of, top and bottom or reversible. One side you'll be knitting and then picking up or putting buttons on. The other side's going to have our button holes. So we're going to start with the button side first. So you can pick, it doesn't matter, just pick one side of the cowl. I do list it as like the left side as it would be worn, which would be this side. So we want to, when we get to this part, we want to make sure it's folded to the inside. We don't want to see any of that. So we're going to use that blue line as our guide. That's what's going to be folded to the inside. So we're going to be picking up between that blue line and the stitch on this side all the way down. But we also have our hem to pick up. So you want to look at the number of stitches to be picked up, and we're pretty much going to have most of these stitches picked up. We'll skip a few here and there. But if you want, look at the number you have to pick up, count the number of rows you have all together, and then you can figure out how many you need to skip. But we're going to start right at the top hem here on this side. So we're looking for our stitches. We've got 2 columns of V's, one along the selvage and then the next one over, and we want to go in between those 2 stitches. So right here, there's a column of stitches here, and you can't really see them, they're curled to the inside, but there's a column right there. So we want to go in between those 2, and then the same on the back, but you don't have to be so picky about the back since we're not really going to see it. But you just want to, if you want to like get both edges, you can, or you can just go through the front and ignore the back. It doesn't really matter, it's up to you. So we get our needle in there, we wrap the yarn, pull it through. I'm holding onto that tail with this hand so I don't lose it. There's my first stitch, so I'm going to go down to the next underneath there, wrap my yarn and pull it through. And I'm just going to keep doing this. There's 3. Okay, I'll skip one there. Oh, that one's going to be really loose, so I don't want to skip that one. So let's go into this one instead. If it feels like it's going to be a really loose and gapey spot, then don't choose that spot. And then we're in this part of the cowl. So we're going to turn that to the inside, and we want to make sure we're picking up between these 2 stitches here. So that blue is going to be on the inside when we're done. It's going to be a little gapey there. I really don't like that spot, so I'm going to go down one more. That looks a little better. And then we're just going to keep following that line, making sure we're picking up the number of stitches we need. I like to take the stitch count and kind of divide it in half, and I know at about the halfway point I need to have, you know, that many stitches there. So I'm just going to continue picking up my stitches along this edge, making sure that I'm staying right along that blue line, that STEEK edge, and that's going to be on the inside when I'm all done. So just go ahead and pick up the stitches that you need for the button band, and you're going to do the same on the right button band as well, with a few little differences for later on when we have to actually put the buttonholes in there. So you're going to only pretty much be leaving out just a few stitches. You're going to pick up almost everything in the center, and then not everything on the edge. You'll get rid of a few from there. But then you're going to just work in stockinette. So I picked up along this side. So now I've got to turn, and I'm going to purl back to the beginning, and then I'm going to knit, and then I'm going to repeat that a couple more times. So we want to have 5 rows of stockinette stitch starting with a purl row. So work your stockinette stitch next, and then I'll come back and talk about what we're going to do next. So I've worked 5 rows of my stockinette stitch here. Now we're going to work our picot or our turning hem folding row. So I'll be doing a purl row. If you want the picot edge, you're going to follow the instructions for the picot edge. So you're just going to do knit 2 together, yarn over, repeat that to the last stitch, and knit 1. I'm doing purl version, so I'm just going to purl across, and then we're going to do some more stockinette. So this button band part is pretty much like the top and bottom folded hem, except it's a little bit smaller. It's not quite as wide as the top and bottom, so it's more like 6 rows instead of the 8 we have there. So we're going to do this part right here. I've knit to that point. Now we're going to do our turning row. We're going to do a little more knitting, then we're going to whip stitch it closed. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of that. Then I'll come back and we'll talk about how we're going to sew it down. We want to tuck in all of our ends and just sew that in, and then also get our buttons put on this side. So I finished. You can see there's my turning row right there. So your picot edge would go there, my purl row. I've done some more stockinette, and now I am binding off. So just doing a standard binding off these stitches. Then when we're done, we're going to leave a long tail because we're going to use that tail to whip stitch everything closed. So I'm going to show you how to do that once I get all of these stitches bound off. Okay, last stitch bound off. I'm going to break this but leave it pretty long because we're going to sew it up with that. Pull that through. Now we can sew this down. So grab a tapestry needle, and what we want to do is we're going to fold this to the inside. We're going to tuck in all of the yarn tails, and we're going to tuck in that STEEK right there. So we're going to fold this down right over our hem, and we're just going to whip stitch this in place. And while we do that, we tuck in all of the ends and the STEEK, and it hides everything really nicely. So if you look on this one here, you can't see the STEEK or any of my ends or anything. They've all been tucked right in there. So this is the side we'll be putting the buttons on. So we want to get this done first. So just like we did the top and the bottom, I'm going to tuck that end. I'll tuck it right in there actually, so it's out of the way. Fold it along that turning row, and then just whip stitch it in place. For this edge, I'm going to use my folded hem right here, and then right up through my bind off edge. Through my edge here, and through the bind offs. If you want to, which I haven't done on my sample, but the top and the bottom are going to be like open like that. If you don't like that, you can sort of come in after and do a little mattress stitch and close that up as well. I don't think it's very noticeable. I didn't do it on here, like it's still open on the top and the bottom. But I don't really pay attention. I don't see it, so it doesn't bother me. But if it does, a little bit of mattress stitch right there to close that up. So you're just going to whip stitch along the edge, and then we'll get to the steeked area, and we want to tuck our STEEK right in so it's hidden in this folded hem. So it's kind of all folded on itself already, like it's folded right down. So I just like to, and this is curled up, you could stop and steam this so it's nice and flat, but I pull it over, and then I'm just gonna look for like the head of a stitch, and I'll scoop up the head and then go under like that bind off chain. Uncurl it a little more, go down to the next row, scoop up the head of that stitch like that, go under my bind off chain. And I just want to be careful, I don't want it to peek through on the right side, so I just stop and I check and make sure there's nothing peeking through here. But as long as you're just like grabbing the loop from this side, you shouldn't have anything peeking through. So I've grabbed like just a strand of the float right there and go under that bind off chain. So that's all we're going to do. We're just going to tuck everything in as we go, any of our ends and our steek, and we're just going to use the head of a stitch if we can find it, or a float if we can't, and then go under the bind off chain. And that closes everything in very nicely. So you're going to do that. And then the next step, once that's done, is to take 5 buttons. You're going to put one up here about 1/2 inch from the top, and one down here about 1/2 inch from the bottom, and then space the other 3 evenly between. Use a ruler if you like. I tend to just eyeball it because it's knitting, it's going to stretch a little bit. So you just want to evenly space your buttons, and then your button band side will be all done. And then we're going to do the whole process again. We're going to pick up our stitches and knit a couple rows, then we're going to stop, and we've got a buttonhole to make. So I'm going to come back and show you how to do that process next. The right button band is now finished, so everything is sewn down. Buttons are added. We're working on the other button band now, and it starts out the exact same way. You're going to pick up the stitches that you need to do. You're going to start working in stockinette stitch. Then we have a buttonhole row, and we actually have to work this twice because we do a folded button band. So we have to work it once on this side and then do our turn row, and then we work it again on the other side. So there's 2 layers for that button. So we're going to do that right now. So we've done this so far, picked up our stitches, we finished a couple rows, we're on a right side row. Now we're going to do that buttonhole row. So it's pretty simple. We're just going to use yarn overs for our buttonholes on this row. So we're going to knit 2, knit 2 together, yarn over, keep it nice and loose because this is going to be for our buttonhole, and then we're going to knit 8, and knit 2 together, and yarn over, and we're going to repeat that 3 more times. Knit 8, knit 2 together, yarn over. Here's my last one, knit 2 together, yarn over, and then we knit the last 3 stitches. So that's our buttonhole row. So we're going to purl a row, then knit another row, and then we're going to do our turning row just the same as before. And then we have to work 2 more rows of stockinette, or 3 more rows, and then we're going to repeat the buttonhole. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do some more stockinette, I'm going to make my turning row, then we'll come back here and I'll show you what it's going to look like before you do that next buttonhole row. So here's where I'm at now. There's that buttonhole row, you can see it there, a little bit more stockinette, my turning row, a couple more rows or 3 rows more of stockinette. Now I'm going to repeat that buttonhole row. Oh, knit 2 together, yarn over, and then do the repeat of knit 8, knit 2 together, yarn over. Okay, knit 3. So now I've got to do a few more rows of stockinette stitch. So we're going to do 3 rows, purl back, knit a row, purl a row, and then we're going to bind off. Then it's time to sew this one down just like we did the other one, but the only difference is we want to line up our buttonholes and make sure they line up. So I'm going to do all of that. I'm going to knit some more stockinette, bind off, and then I'll come back and we will whip stitch this edge together and then talk about what we can do if we want to sort of close up these buttonholes so they act as one fabric. In this sample I didn't do anything, so it's actually 2 layers. I could actually fit my finger through that little hole in the bottom. So like there's a buttonhole on each side, which that's totally fine. We can leave it just like that if we want, or I'm gonna try to do the blanket stitch. I've never done it before, so I'm gonna like pull out some resources and read about it. And then if we want to, we can sew the 2 buttonholes together so they are one fabric. So we're gonna give that a try. So I'm gonna finish up my button band here, my buttonhole band, and then we'll be back and we'll get this all finished off. So I've all finished with that. So it's time to whip stitch this down in place, and we're gonna do that exactly the same way as we did the previous button band. So here's how it looks before. We've picked up, we've done some stockinette, we did our buttonhole row, a little more stockinette, our turn row, stockinette, buttonhole row, stockinette, bind off. So we're at that point. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to tuck in our tails, bring this over, and then whip stitch it in place, but we want to make sure our buttonholes are on top of each other. Make sure you can see your finger through there. So I'm going to hold that one in place, and I'm just going to whip stitch, picking up this first stitch from that button band and right underneath my cast on edge, and just close it right up. So just like the other one, that buttonhole is secure. Then I'm going to finish whip stitching this, so just working my way down, checking the front side to make sure I'm not accidentally going through the fabric. I'm going to bring my button band over this. Now this one wants to stay on the outside, so I can fold it to the inside and do that and bring it over the top. But we have to be careful because then it puts that steek where our buttonhole is. So it can be better to sort of just pull the button band over that and then kind of tuck it in, but we want to keep it in there, but we don't want it to get in the way of our buttonhole. So however you have to manipulate it to tuck it in, but keep it out of the buttonhole. My next buttonhole is coming up, so I want to make sure it's lined up. Both layers are lined up there, and then the steek is right there. It can be helpful too on the buttonhole side to like go through the steek as well. So I'm picking up a strand from my knitting, going through the steek and going through the cast on edge. So that's going to kind of keep the steek in place right there, so it's not going to interfere with my buttonhole. So that's another option. I don't do that the whole way down, but just where my buttonholes are, just to make sure the steek isn't going to interfere or get, caught between the buttonhole layers. But once you have your buttons in there, you're not going to be noticing that as much. So we're just going to keep working until this is all whip stitched in place. So once you've finished sewing that down, you're all set to go. You just want to give it a wash or a steam and get everything to relax, and then you can button it up. The last step, optional step, is if you want to do a blanket stitch or a buttonhole stitch around the opening to join the 2 layers together. I didn't bother to do that on this one. It's 2 separate layers, but once it's buttoned, I just leave it buttoned for the most part. So it hasn't really bothered me that they're not sewn together. But this is an optional step if you want to do that. And it's pretty simple to do. So just gonna make sure my steek is out of the way. And I wanna make sure that everything is lined up. I'm gonna come through from behind, right into the hole. And then all we're going to do is start on this side. That's where my yarn is coming out of. We're just going to go we're going to make like a little selvage around there. So I'm just catching part of a stitch, not the whole stitch. I just want to make sure those 2 edges are joined. I'm going to enter, but then I'm going to put the yarn behind my needle, like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to keep going around, just catching right along the edge, making sure I'm going through both layers, and the yarn is behind my needle. And if you have to, like, use your finger to open up those buttonholes. This can actually close it up a little bit because we're putting some yarn around there, so you can use your finger to make that yarn over a little bigger. And then I'm going to repeat that down here on the bottom. Go under those bars, put the yarn behind, just like that. And then just kind of going around the edge, I just want to secure those 2 layers. Oops, make sure that yarn was behind, is not behind. So I'm going to put my needle through the loop. Oops, don't know if I should have done that, but it works. Okay, so yarn that way. I am not a professional blanket stitcher, so just is enough to keep these buttonholes joined. So through the layer, the yarn is behind my needle, sort of so we can like catch it all the way around. And making sure I'm getting both layers. Oh, that's a little far from the edge. So I'm just doing like half a stitch in from the edge. The yarn is behind. There, I'm going to do one more right here, really open up this hole. And then I'm just going to come back down over here to the back, and then I can weave in that end, and that has joined those 2 layers. And then I can make sure my button's going to fit. I like it to be a little of a tight fit because I don't want the buttons to keep popping out of the buttonhole. So just kind of go in sideways, and yeah, that's going to fit just fine. So there we go. So that's your last optional step, is to add that blanket stitch or buttonhole stitch if you want, and then just wash and block, and it's ready to wear. So if you've been following along up to this point, hopefully you've finished your cowl and you're ready to get it washed and blocked and ready to wear. And you can apply these skills that you've learned, the button bands, the steeking, the cutting, all of that, to any of your future projects. So perhaps you might decide to tackle a colorwork cardigan that you know you're going to steek and cut. Now you have all the skills that you need. And if you haven't cast on yet, then why not grab that pattern down below and start knitting along with me. I'll see you in the next video.